I believe that everybody has a story, and I'm fascinated to hear them. So come with me as we take a walk down Fascination Street. Welcome back, Streetwalkers. This is part 2 of my conversation with Joe Lafferty, author of the book Just in Time, A Memoir of Faith and the Fight for Life. In this episode, we talk more about Joe's coaching career and getting to coach 15 National Football League players. And also, we talk about the day Joe died. You heard me. And we also talk about a young man who changed Joe's life shortly after that. This is a wonderfully compelling episode. I hope you enjoy it. There is a giveaway at the end of this episode, so pay attention and do the things. And this is part 2 of my conversation with Joe Lafferty.
Yeah, talk to me, yeah.
So, you lost an eye. How difficult the decision? I know that it just took you a couple of minutes, but how intensely did you think about it, or were you just like, just take it?
No, I didn't like Rambo that up. For me, that was a moment of courage because I've heard courage defined as those who are afraid but go anyway. You know, I told you about getting up in front of people and talking. I don't have any fear of that. So if I went somewhere today and they said, Joe, can you give a couple words about organ donation? I can take the mic and go for 20 minutes. That's very easy for me. So for me to speak in front of people is not courageous. That was a moment of courage for me because I didn't want to lose my eye, but I knew it was what I had to do. I was afraid to die. I knew not having a left eye was going to be hard, but I don't call myself courageous that much. I don't know if I've ever have. But that was a moment of courage for me because I was scared. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't want to lose my eye, but I went anyway. So while it was a truncated timetable, like my dad said, don't lose any ground. I didn't want to lose a day thinking about it. And I was convinced, and they were convinced, that my vision wasn't coming back. And I was risking the staph infection going to my brain. And from what they told me, that was lights out. And I didn't want that. I wanted to, regroup and keep fighting. It was a short timetable, and I make it seem glib, but it wasn't at all.
All right. Now, back in the olden days, and maybe still today, I have no idea, teens at parties used to gather together and play a game where they put a boy and a girl in a closet and they're supposed to make out or whatever for 7 minutes. That game is called 7 Minutes in Heaven. You died for 7 minutes. Did you go to heaven?
I never played that game. What if you're partnered in there with someone you don't want to be in there? Is it still 7 minutes in heaven?
That's technically the game, but I have heard tale of when the door comes open, they're like, more like 7 minutes in hell.
Did you ever play that game?
No, I did not.
Okay. No, I didn't either. So I moved back to Pittsburgh in 2002. And it would be 5 years later and some medical challenges. My organs started to fail.
Why?
I didn't know why my organs started to fail. The symptoms were my blood pressure shot up and my cholesterol shot up all of a sudden. And my organs were failing, primarily my kidneys. And I went from like 45% to 17% in 6 months. And I needed dialysis immediately, 3 times a week, 4 hours a day, and I wanted to get on the transplant list. When they're putting you through the process to get on the transplant list, you have to go through dozens of doctor's appointments to get the okay, to do tests. And the first time they went to approve me for the list, the doctors on the board told my coordinator, there's something more with his heart. We need more of a heart workup. Something isn't right with his heart numbers. So they did a deeper workup on my heart and found that I not only had a murmur, but I had 2 leaky heart valves, mitral and aortic. And they rate those things on a scale of 1 to 16. Anything above a 7, they replace. Well, my one valve was a 12, that bad, and my other valve was already an 8. So they had to replace both valves. Anyone who knows about dialysis knows that you have to plug in to get it done. They were plugging in through a PICC line in my neck, and I kept getting these infections. So for the better part of like 7 months, every couple of weeks, I'd end up in the hospital with an infection and then in there for 14 days and then 6 weeks of prophylactic antibiotics. And that extended the time from when I needed the heart surgery to when I could have it. And right about July of 2008, My fistula in my arm was working. They were doing the dialysis in my arm rather than my neck. I hadn't had any infections in a while and was down at the football field coaching. And I started to get winded. I immediately called my dad and said, I need to go to the hospital. And we went down to the hospital and they said, hey, we're going to do that heart surgery now. We're going to give you those 2 steel heart valves. It's time. We can't wait any longer. And that was on a Friday, July of '08. And I remember signing for the anesthesia. And I remember the anesthesiologist wearing a colored surgical hat. And when I woke up, I told my dad he looked awful. And we started arguing about what day it was because I was damn sure that it was Friday, the day of the surgery. It was 6 days later. It was the following Thursday. And I had been out for that amount of time. Come to find out that surgery went well. Saturday, I got out of bed. Sunday, I got out of bed. They changed the sheets. I was using the bathroom. Monday morning, the nurse came in, and I wanted a banana for breakfast, which is funny because you don't give heart surgery patients that much potassium at once. So she walked out of the room, and I flatlined, which is a kind term for died. But that's what you see on TV. You see the flat line. I flatlined or coded, and they came in and worked on me. It took them 7 minutes to get me back. Shout out to the folks at UPMC Montefiore in Pittsburgh for saving my life. Put me on the cold bed. I was having a reaction for some reason. I never got this explanation, but they had to strap me to the cold bed because I kept wanting to get up. And my eyes were closed, and I kept wanting to get up. So they strapped me down. It's pretty graphic from my sister's account, my parents' account, and Reverend David Paul. Got out of the cold bed and was just laying there mumbling, what day is it? What time is it? Until I woke up Thursday night, about 9:45 at night. I was in the cardiac ICU. He and my mom had been there like 24/7 for 4 days. He looked awful, and I told him so and asked him why he was in the recovery room. He shouldn't be in there. And that's when we started arguing about what day it was. I don't remember anything. I don't know if I went to heaven. I didn't go to heaven. I don't have any memory of it. I remember signing for the anesthesia and a colorful dream and then waking up. Everything I told you about Friday, Saturday, Sunday, the cold bed, the mumbling, those are all anecdotes that were shared with me. I have no memory of any of it.
Now, at the time when you found out that you had died, how did you receive that news?
I was fine for about a year.
A whole year?
Oh, yeah, I was fine with it for about a year because I only knew forward. In fact, I spent 5 weeks in the hospital. And at one point, I threw a tray of food because they kept telling me I could get out the next day if this Coumadin level got straight. And they came back with a test, and it had fluctuated again. And I was so upset, not with someone, I threw a tray of food at the door. I wasn't mad at anyone. I didn't throw it at anyone. My sister was in the room, and I just flipped it towards the door and was upset. And I said I was leaving the hospital. And my sister said, okay. And she waited until I went to the bathroom, and she took my wallet and my clothes and my backpack and left with it. And I couldn't leave. I was going to walk out of the hospital. I didn't care. I was going to unplug things and leave. That's how frustrated I was being in the hospital for 5 weeks. And I was weak. I was very weak, but I didn't want to be there any longer. And that's probably my only outburst ever in a hospital. But I stuck it out and got out of there. It was a tough road to hoe. And I got out, and 8 days later, I traveled with the Woodland Hills football team back to Dallas and Texas Stadium, and we lost the game to a high school from Texas.
Is that the picture on the cover of your book?
That is the picture. That is 43 days after I died. I'm standing there looking like a meme facing a referee, but we were actually talking about a friend of mine from Dallas who I lived with when I lost my eye, actually. So it was a great situation. We shared this big house. But yeah, we were talking about a friend. I think I look really mean in that picture, but I wasn't. I was talking about a friend, and it was 109 degrees on the field that day. I don't know what I was doing there. I probably shouldn't have went, but I wanted to be with my team. That was our opener that year. And we lost 14-12, but I'm glad I made that trip and got that picture.
This was when you were one of the coaches for Woodland Hills. Is that a high school? What kind of school is that?
That is a high school. Formed in 1987, right over the hill from the Edgar Thompson Steel Mill, which is in Braddock, Pennsylvania. The two big steel mills in Pittsburgh are the Homestead Works, which no longer exist, and then the other one across the river, which is the Edgar Thompson plant. And Edgar Thompson plant is within the Woodland Hills School District and once was filled with thousands of people and I think 11 high schools in that area. And over the years, it's whittled down to one. But I don't want to sidestep something you asked me. So can I circle back for a second?
Pretty please.
Well, I think it's important because of mental health. And you asked me, how did my dying affect me? It was almost a year later because it was springtime, I remember. And my good friend, Reverend David Paul, I didn't drive. He was driving me around. And well, I was volunteering and going to lunch with people. And one day after dialysis, I went home and I sat in my desk chair and turned towards the window. And all of a sudden, it was 4 hours later. And I realized I'd been staring out the window for 4 hours. And that alarmed me. And I said something to him. And he said, I've noticed lately you don't seem like yourself. I think you may be depressed. I said, what do I do? And he said, well, you need to talk to someone. I said, well, you're a psychologist. And he said, no, idiot, you can't talk to me. I'm your friend. We got to find you someone else. So that's what I mentioned earlier. He drove me to see the psychologist in Oakland outside Pittsburgh. And I went in and, he's the one, he said, just go in there and dump it all out and he'll sift through it and find the stuff that you need to talk about. So I went into this first session with the psychologist and we started talking and going back and forth. I was giving him some background and some history as you do in your first session. And I said something to the effect about being here. And he laughed and he said, well, I'll ask the question, Joe, why do you think you're here? And we had a good laugh about that because that's kind of the cliche psychologist question. And I thought about it for a second and I said, a year ago I died and it happened so fast I didn't have time to be afraid. And now I'm afraid because someone else has to die so I can live as part of this transplant process. And he was dead silent. And he just looked at me and he was like, okay. And I said, how'd I do? he said, that was pretty good. And I said, am I cured? And he went, oh, no. So after about, I think it was 7 or 8 sessions with him, we were talking and he said, let me ask you a question. Do you feel better? And I said, I do feel better. And he said, well, I think this is going to continue. You talk about talking to your friend David? He said, I know him through a contact. He's like, yeah. He said, keep talking to him. I don't think you need to come back, but if you do, you're welcome to. So after 7 or 8 or 9 sessions, he set me free. I had a problem with the fact that I knew I'd exhausted all my living donor possibilities and my friends and family. I knew I was going to have to wait for a deceased donor, and I didn't want someone to have to die so I could live. And I just had to accept that that's part of the process and that's part of God's plan. It didn't mean it was going to happen sooner or later. It just meant it could happen potentially. And that wasn't my call. And like I say about my donor, who we'll talk about, I'm not responsible for 2 souls, but I am responsible to live my life to honor his gift. That's what I needed that counselor for. And I think mental health problems that we go through today, the biggest thing is knowing you need to help and then being humble or wise or just, I don't know, just you have to ask for the help. That's the toughest thing to do. But, I beg people, ask for help when you need it. I'm like that. I ask for help all the time when I need it. But I wanted to circle back to that because you asked me an important question, and mental health is very important. And that's something we all need to focus on for ourselves. We're the only ones who know what's going on in our own brain, and unless we share it with someone.
That is the truth. My wife currently is, my mother was, my wife's sister is, and my wife's mother is. They are all psychiatric nurses. So, yeah, mental health right up there. It's a big one. It's a doozy. So thank you for going back and grabbing that.
Hey, Streetwalkers. Here's a word from our sponsors.
Guess what, Streetwalkers? The gear is here. A bunch of you have been asking for quite some time, and now finally it's here. Head over to FascinationStreetPod.com and check out the gear tab. There, you'll find all kinds of FSP items to tickle your fancy. T-shirts, coffee mugs, sticker packs, pins, buttons, coasters, and my personal favorite, for just $5 you can get one of those weird little phone handle pop thingies. So head to FascinationStreetPod.com and show the world that you're proud to be a streetwalker. Special thanks to my good buddy Stephen O'Reilly from the Bar Star Podcast for these dope drum beats. Check out Steve's work at O'Reilly Drums on Instagram or search Stephen O'Reilly on YouTube.
Let's get back into it.
During the time that you worked at Woodland Hills High School, as one of the coaches, you coached some pretty amazing players. I'm sure plenty that we don't know the names of, but also there's 15 players that went on to the National Football League that you helped coach. What does that feel like?
It's a blessing. It's so generic an answer, but it truly is a blessing. And not to sound too arrogant, but the sad fact is there were more that could have made it that didn't. The Woodland Hills is partially an economically depressed area, and all the familial problems that come out of that, and surrounding schools too. But to see young men like that go through high school and college, and the ones that listen to their parents and their guardians and their teachers and their coaches and their community leaders that they're involved with, it's the ones that listen and take heed and take the advice that always do the best. And we were fortunate. Just 2 years behind me at Woodland Hills, although he didn't play his sophomore year, so I didn't play with him, was Jason Taylor, the Hall of Fame Miami Dolphin. So Jason's from that area, and I coached Chris Edmonds, who played 5 years for the Bengals. This is in the mid-'90s. And when he was in high school, he played 5 years for the Bengals and the Bills. He was an All-American at West Virginia. And then coming into the late 90s and the early 2000s through 2012, there were several NFL guys. Lusaka Polite, who was a fullback for 5 years, the only 3-time captain in Pitt football history. There's Shante Spencer, a cornerback, who after starting at Pitt for 4 years and covering Larry Fitzgerald for 4 years, he spent 11 seasons in the NFL. Steve Breston, who is the Big Ten return record holder out of Michigan, who spent 6 seasons in the NFL, and along with Anquan Bolden and Larry Fitzgerald and Kurt Warner. So they went to the Super Bowl and lost to the Steelers, but Stevie is one of the 3 receivers that has ever caught 1,000 yards each in one season. Dan Fouts did that, and Kurt Warner did that. Stevie's part of that crew, which is an amazing record in itself. And then Ryan Mundy, the safety, spent 5 years in the league. And then not long after that, Terrence Johnson, another cornerback in the league, and Darren Walls, another cornerback in the league. And I like the story of Darren Walls because he got a full ride to go to Notre Dame, started as a freshman in Notre Dame, and his first game, him starting at cornerback for the Fighting Irish, he went up against Megatron, who was a senior at Georgia Tech. I can't remember that kid's name. I just know his nickname was Megatron, and that was his start to college football. And then not long after that, we got a call, as schools do in Pittsburgh. You get this dad that calls you and says, hey, I'm moving into your area, and I want my son to play for you. And he's a really good football player. That's a common call that coaches in our area get. And sometimes the kid's not bad, and sometimes it's just a dad feeling it out to see if your team needs a quarterback or a running back or something. But my head coach was always like, well, hey, we'd love to have him. I think we got some good kids. But if you move into this area, please come out for football. Coach Novak picked me up and taken me to practice, and he told me to dress up a little bit for a summer practice. And he said, there's a kid coming in with his dad. He's supposedly pretty good. He has 50 college offers, which I scoffed at and said, that's ridiculous. Whatever, 50 offers. He said, well, he's pretty good. Supposed to be from Buffalo. And I'm like, yeah, good football player from Buffalo. Yeah, right. So the coaches saw him coming, and there was some hooting and hollering. And I saw this tuft of hair about 6'6" off the ground. And I saw Gordy Gronkowski first, and he's a powerfully built man and puts guys my age to shame. And he's 17, 18 years older than I am. And then I saw a 235-pound 17-year-old Rob Gronkowski and was blown away by. And I said, there is a kid with 50 offers. And he immediately wanted to go up to the weight room. And when a kid like that walks in, everybody's interested. And he told everyone he was coming there. This is before we even knew that. And he started working out with our guys. He jumped right in. And that year we had some pretty successful football players, some D1 guys. And he jumped right in with that. And we got to play with him that year and did pretty well. And then in years after, there was a young man named Rontez Miles who went to the NFL and is still in the NFL. He graduated with Rob, played for the Jets, longtime Jets player. And then Quentin Jefferson. I like this story. My last year was 2013. I coached. We had 2 running backs. We had a senior and a freshman. And the freshman was not bad, but the senior was seasoned. He'd been starting for 2 years. But he'd had a lackluster camp. In the first scrimmage, he didn't do well. So the edict for that week was, okay, we have to work this young man. I won't say his name. We have to work him hard because we need him to be our workhorse. So we have to be on him this week. We got to make sure he's doing everything right and don't let up on him. And I remember that week, midweek, we were doing our big conditioning night because it's all very scientific. And he came in dead last in his group running across the field. They were running back and forth 6 times. And he came in dead last in the back and forth 6. And I told him, you don't come in the front half of that group. I'll run everyone again. And he tested me, and I made them run 6 times again across and 4 times again. This is triple the work it was supposed to be. And that week, he had an exemplary scrimmage. He had an amazing scrimmage. We thought we'd done it, and that freshman was starting to look good. And we were talking about the freshman in the offensive meeting that week. And we said, hey, if this freshman starts to get better in week 7 or 8, he'll be able to give the starter a break, and the starter might be able to play a little defense. Because we ran the Redskins counter tray offense, which teaches the running back to take a read step before hitting the hole. That's not just take off and run to the hole. You have to read. You have to take a draw step before you go, which is inherently hard for some kids to learn. So we said, once this freshman gets it, he'll be able to give the senior some rest. We won't have to give him the ball 25 times a game. Well, don't you know, on Monday of that week, the senior walked into the head coach's office and said, I want to transfer to this private school, and I don't want you to put up a stink about it. I want you to transfer and let me play so I can play my senior year there, which our head coach was the athletic director. He said, okay, if you don't want to be here, you don't have to be here. And that week, we started that freshman. That over that next week, we completely changed the offense and started going from under the center to a shotgun. We had a quarterback who just had an amazing year, but we had to rely on that running back. And his name is Miles Sanders, and Penn State fans know him. And he's the rookie sensation that just blew up the Philadelphia Eagles backfield this year. So we called Miles into work early. He was just a little baby freshman at the time.
Nice.
He showed out, and he did an amazing job at Penn State. And he's once again one of those guys that is a nice young man and takes care of his community, takes care of his mom. Just a pleasure to know. I don't know him as well as I know some of the other guys, because I was only around him a year, but my friends know him well, and he's just magnanimous and kind and do anything for you. So those are the stories you want to hear about those guys in the NFL.
Yeah, it is. And so of all those people that you mentioned, Quentin, Trayvon, Rontez, and Miles are still currently playing. Everybody else is retired. Wait, what's that? Hold on. I'm just being informed right now. This just in. I believe Rob Gronkowski might make a return to the NFL. I don't know if you have any inside info, and I don't want to know if you do. That's not what this is. But what do you think about the idea that he might come back after being gone for a couple of years?
I was hoping you'd do your Sam the Eagle straight from the Muppet News Desk. This just in. Let's go out to Kermit, our reporter on the scene. I'm hearing that Rob Gronkowski is going to be a Tampa Bay Buccaneer.
Daniel LaRusso's going to fight?
I think I can tell this story. I send out inspirational text messages every day to a number of people, and Rob's on that list. And there's a quote on my book, something he said about me, and I used it on the cover of my book, which is, I get these inspirational messages from Coach every day, and it gets me through. Roughly, that's what it says. And I'm closest to his oldest brother, Gordy, because we're closest in age, even though I'm, much older than him. But he was always around more, and he's the business guy. He's the oldest. When I would go to Boston a couple times I did for a game, I'd interact more with him. Gordy and I talk every once in a while, and he's an amazing young man, great businessman like all the other ones. But he's the oldest and maybe the wisest. But I was texting Gordy, and he kept giving me the thumbs up. But about a year ago, I was having a conversation with Gordy about Rob, and he'd retired, and it had been about a month or 5 weeks. And I asked him, I said, how's he doing? He's like, well, Joe, it can't be easy. And I went, no, it can't be easy. The kid wanted to be the best football player in the NFL since he was 10 years old, and he was, and now he's 30, and he's out of a job. This is how I explain Rob is, what did you want to be when you were 8 years old? Did you want to be an astronaut? Did you want to be president of the United States? Did you want to be a football player? Well, Rob wanted to be the best football player in the NFL, and he worked every day to do that. And then he got to be the best player in the NFL, obviously his position, but arguably the best. And he woke up in that dream of that 8-year-old dream every day. So, of course, he's a giddy, fun-loving guy. And I like those guys. I love the way Juju Smith-Schuster acts. he's having a blast being who he is. And I like that. I don't like famous people that can't handle being famous or think it's a chore. Playing a game for a living is fun. It's still a work, but it is fun, and those guys have fun doing it. And I love that about Juju and Rob. And that's the way Rob played. So a year ago when I'm talking to Gordy, I said, of course he's bummed out, Gordy. He worked his whole life to do this. And I never thought he would come back. I couldn't imagine a scheme. Rob's very smart, has his fingers in a lot of pies, could make money a bunch of different ways. I think he was taking acting classes at some point. He may still be taking them. The guy meditates. He's a unique person, and I don't think too many people know the whole Rob Gronkowski. I know him better than most, and I know I sure don't. He's a lot smarter. He's a lot more well-spoken. He's a lot more well-read than people give him credit for. But he's not dumb, and he loves playing the game. So I guarantee this is more strategic than it seems. I'm excited to see what's going to happen. I don't think he'd come back if he didn't think he could perform at the same level. I think the time off did him a lot of good because I knew from people that he was feeling better and better. And to quote LaDainian Tomlinson, being a running back in the NFL is like getting hit by a car 16 weeks in a row. And Rob played with that reckless abandon with his body, and I'm sure the year off has been very beneficial for him. So I'm anxious to see him come back. And I know one thing, he will not do it halfway. It will be his number one 100% effort. And we'll see how it shows out with the team around him and Tom throwing him the ball. And I can't wait to see what happens next.
Well, it is definitely going to be a reason to pay attention to the Buccaneers.
Absolutely.
We have spent the last 2 episodes not getting to the point because you have such a fascinating life and you're full of fascinating stories. And now I want you to tell me, who is Justin Boyer?
Justin Dale Boyer was a fascinating 16-year-old, and what I know of him is very little. What I do know about him was he liked to make people laugh, and he was in a car accident on February 12th of 2010 and sustained a head injury and never recovered. And in the depths of grief, his parents made a mind-blowing decision to think of others. Organ donation sounds easy, but the people that do it, like Rhonda and Scott Bussard and Ron Boyer, Justin's father, they made the decision while they had just lost what many say is the worst loss, is losing your child as a parent. They chose to think of others, and that's mind-boggling to me. And it's not lost on me that the best day of my year is the worst day of theirs as far as anniversaries go. All of Justin's organs except his heart was donated because his heart had been damaged. I'm the only one that ever reached back out to the Bussards, and that's the way it goes sometimes with organ donation and transplantation. Some people don't make it. The organs don't work. Some people don't know what to say. Some donor families never want to revisit the pain, and that's okay too. There's no wrong way to save someone's life, because I've talked to many donor families who donated and then never talked to their recipients, and that's their choice. There's no wrong way to do it. There's no wrong way to save someone's life, as I just said. But Justin Dale Boyer played the guitar, and he was a fun kid. And I was honored to be there with his family and say a few words at his high school graduation. He's got a great little sister and some great older siblings. His older brother, Sergeant Ron Boyer, is in the Army. They're an amazing family. To say I owe them my life this is my favorite cliche. To compare me saying I owe them my life and the feelings I feel for them is like shooting a bullet and throwing one. That's why I get tongue-tied when I start talking about them, is because I'm good with words and I can talk, but I can't say how I feel about them. So Justin Dale Boyer is my hero, and his mother, Rhonda, is my hero because they saved my life and thought of others when they didn't have to. That's how this organ donation thing works. It's a beautiful thing and it's an awful thing. And that's why I was depressed, because someone was going to have to die and I didn't know who, and I didn't think anyone should have to die so I could live, but that's the way it works. And I'm humbled by that. And when I was working on the book, the title just came to me because, like I said, I'm not responsible for Justin's soul. That's in heaven. I'm not responsible for his soul. What I am responsible to do is to live a life that honors his gift to me. So the book is Just in Time. I live my life on time given to me by him. Just in Time, a memoir of faith and the fight for life.
That's beautiful.
Hey, Streetwalkers, here's a word from our sponsors.
Hey guys, if you like what I'm doing, click the Amazon banner at the top of the homepage on FascinationStreetPod.com and do all of your shopping through Amazon. Once you click on it and it takes you to Amazon, you can bookmark it or add it to your favorites and you won't have to go to my site each time. It helps me keep the show going, and again, thanks for listening.
Hey, are you interested in getting from A to B while sitting? At Detroit Bikes, we've got a new product that I think you're going to love. It's a bicycle. It's got 2 wheels, hence the bi. And the sickle is because it's a cycle that your wheels go in. So this is a product where you've got a seat. You are actually sitting while moving.
Wow.
And it's as easy as just pedaling, pushing with your legs. So we think that customers are going to love this product, and we hope you'll check it out at www.detroitbikes.com.
www.detroitbikes.com.
Let's get back into it.
If it were to happen that there was a movie made out of this book and your life story, who plays you?
Well, it seems like a long shot.
You're casting this, okay? Who is it?
It's Chris Pratt or John Krasinski. I wasn't the best football player, but I wasn't bad. I mean, I played in college. I was always the smallest cog in the football machine that I was part of. And my last day of football was my 4th year at Mercyhurst when I walked up on the field, and I sighed before I put my helmet on. I went, ugh. This was a third of the way through the season, and I walked back to the locker room. I took off my equipment and never put it back on because deep down inside, I knew that I wasn't good enough to play halfway. If I wasn't giving every ounce of everything I had, and I loved every practice of football, every single practice. And when I got disgusted because I had to go to football practice that day in college that was my 12th year of contact football in my life. When I was disgusted, I turned around and left. I wasn't starting, so it wasn't a big gaping loss to the team. I was a special teams player at best. It wasn't a great loss, but I supported the team. And some of the coaches tried to talk me back on the team. And I said, no, I can't do it. I'm not that good. So that, I say that because I don't know if John Krasinski could pull off being a football player.
He did it once before. He was already in a football movie.
John Krasinski?
Yeah.
What movie was that? Was he in The Little Giants?
No, he was in that George Clooney one.
Wait, there's a George Clooney football movie?
Are you high?
No, never in my life.
It's called Leatherheads. Leatherheads is a 2008 American sports comedy film from Universal Pictures directed by and starring George Clooney. The film also stars Renee Zellweger, Jonathan Pryce, and John Krasinski, and focuses on the early years of professional football, back when they wore leather helmets.
I've never seen or heard of that movie.
It made $41 million at the box office.
I'm astounded that I've never even heard of it. That's saying something.
Now, don't get me wrong, it still lost like $15 million, but yeah, it made 41. Go check it out. But so yeah, John can play football.
John Krasinski, only because his father's from Pittsburgh, and he gave an interview when they were hyping up Promised Land that he thought the world wants to see real life stories. And I love The Office, of course. I really like his acting. His Jack Ryan is great. I think it would be tough for Chris Pratt to play me, but I think he has the chops to do it. Because what you don't know about me is that, as I kind of said earlier about kind of my life being like Forrest Gump, is there's an element of Joker in my life. And I've realized this through talking to mental health professionals. When you face down death at an early age, there's a cynicism and a coldness that I have. It can be used for good, and also I can be cold. And there's this part of me that is very removed, almost, I mean, I'm not a psychopath, but almost the way a sociopath or a psychopath can turn things off and on. And that's why I don't think I found the woman of my dreams until after I went through everything, because I don't think I had a gear to really care. I mean, I love my family, but, you know, your family's easy to love. They've always been there for you, if that's the case. You know, they've been there from the beginning. Your parents made you, they raised you, you know, or whoever raised you, of course you're there for them. But, you know, when you find a spouse, that's someone you're choosing to love. To me, that's another gear. And I didn't have that gear until I went through all this. And I had to grow into that. So I dated some great women throughout my life, but I never really cared for any of them. You couldn't tell me that at the time, but looking back, I was like, oh my gosh, that's, you know, I didn't really care for them. And I think I had to go through everything to grow that level of emotion and find the woman of my dreams. So there's a part of me that is kind of like the Joker, kind of like a sociopath, because when you're fighting for your life, you have to fight for life and death, and you can't care about other people's feelings and other things like that. Those are my 2 cents on how to make the right move. And I hope Chris Pratt has that gear to be able to show that darkness, or what Carl Jung talks about, the shadow. To be an evolved person, you have to embrace your shadow self. And I think I had to do that. I didn't know it at the time until I studied it. But I think I had to do that at the time to beat back some of these medical challenges of my life.
I think you did too. So if there was a movie about you, yes, the movie would be about you, but the heroes in the story would not be you. They would be Justin and Rhonda. Who plays them?
I don't know, because I don't know them that well. Like I said, I know so little about Justin. And sometimes I talk about him a lot, and I realize I shouldn't do that because I only know a couple things about him. There was a depth and a beauty to him that only his family knows about, and I don't know that. You know, making a movie is kind of such a far-off thing and a wild thing. I like to joke around with my family. I have an uncle that thinks Pierce Brosnan should play him. We're from Pittsburgh, and my uncle, although a very learned and classy dude, has the same kind of accent that Bill Cowher and Dennis Miller have.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So can you imagine Pierce Brosnan playing Dennis Miller in the Dennis Miller story?
No, I can't even, not even a little bit.
Yeah. My uncle's a good-looking guy. Don't get me wrong. He's not he's not James Bond good-looking, but I like to joke about that. It's fun because you don't think it's ever going to happen.
Yeah, that's true. Hey, you went to Los Angeles?
I did. It was at the end of February.
Did you go by yourself?
No, I went with the love of my life, my angel, Jennifer.
Oh, how did your wife feel about that?
Well, I had to go out there for organ donation reasons. I helped Joey Gates, who was a Cup NASCAR driver. He has donated his mother's organs a month after he turned 18, came home, and she'd had an aneurysm, and he made the tough decision that Rhonda and Scott and Ron Boyer made. And he donated his mother's organs. Now he's 26, and he's a NASCAR driver, so when he goes from town to town, he engages with a local organ procurement organization. So he got a sponsorship from the Los Angeles Organ Procurement Organization, which is called One Legacy. And I got to go out to the race, which is at Fontana, and be in the pit and out on the track for the national anthem and sit above where the cars pit, like 5 feet above where the car is. Forget hearing it and feeling the vibration. You can smell the rubber as they rumble by on pit row there. It's an amazing thing to do. Jennifer and I got to go out for a couple of days to Los Angeles before that, and then we were there for the race, and we came back.
Well, let me ask you this. What did you and your wife Jennifer do on her first trip to Los Angeles?
Well, keep in mind, if you've been listening, Streetwalkers, that I've led this Forrest Gump type life, so why this surprised me, it shouldn't have. But about a month before we went to Los Angeles, Jennifer came to me and said, hey, you're a Judd Apatow fan, right? She knows me. And she didn't say that. She said, hey, there's this thing called Judd Apatow and Friends, and the tickets are $50. And I think it's a comedy thing. And I said, Judd Apatow, $50? Yeah, let's do it. She said, it's the first night we get there. I said, cool. So, you know, I was excited, and I know, and you know, Steve, who Judd Apatow's best friend is. And I wondered, and I started looking up this, and there'd been other ones. It's a fundraiser, and they have it at this place called Largo at the Coronet, and it's a little kind of nightclub kind of thing in West Hollywood, and I couldn't learn a lot about it, but I knew in the days before Judd Apatow and Friends, Nick Kroll and Friends had a thing, and Sarah Silverman and friends had an event there. So I'm like, okay, I guess they have their friends come out and do a little comedy or whatever. So we got up at 3:30 in the morning, Florida time, and got on the plane and flew to Los Angeles and landed in Los Angeles at noon and Ubered to our downtown hotel and kind of chilled out for a little while. And we said, this thing starts at 8:30. So at around 5:30, I said, let's go downstairs. And Jen likes to have some red wine. We'll have red wine. You get your red wine. And we'll decide what we're going to do for dinner. So we went down and she's like, I'm really tired. And I said, well, then let's just eat here and then relax and then go to the show straight from here. And she said, okay, let me have some wine. So now it's about 20 after 6. And she has 2 sips of wine and essentially starts to melt. And because of the jet lag and the long day and literally 2 sips of wine in 5 minutes, she's lost all desire to leave the hotel. She wants to fall asleep in the chair in the lounge. And I have to talk her into toughing it out for this event. And I admit we almost blew it off. So I said, well, let's go out there early and maybe, the vibe of the whole place will, get us going. So we went out and we got there at 5 to 7 and they opened the doors and we got our tickets. Largo at the Cornet is what you think is this rundown kind of coffee house. Used to be a movie theater. When I was a kid, I would have been like, this place is a dump. But I know now as an adult that it's historic. And if they made any upgrade, they'd have to bring it all up to code. And then they couldn't have that many seats there and they'd need this and that. And it would ruin the whole vibe of the place. So Jennifer's almost falling asleep outside the theater. Once they opened the theater at around 8 o'clock, we went in, got our seats. There are these hard steel seats back when people used to watch movies and shows when everyone was skinny. I'm not a big guy, but I had to sit forward to get in my pocket. Like, it was tough. And of course, 8:30 comes around and thank God they started the show and it's packed. The small high school I went to for 1 year before they combined them, it was twice the size of this theater. It was not big at all. I looked it up today. It's 250 seats. We were on the right section on the aisle, about 5 rows back. And Judd Apatow comes out and everyone's applauding and excited. And, he starts talking about the money raised, the $50 per seat went to the Jewish Defense League. He made some reference to coronavirus and buying bottled water. And he was doing some jokes and they were funny. And he said, when you do one of these things with your friends, you call around, you put the call out and people respond who can come. And sometimes these lineup cards are better than others. And he said, and I'm amazed to tell you that tonight we have the best lineup we've ever had by far. And I'm a salesman, Steve. I'm like, yeah, I've heard that before. Like, I'm sure he says that every time. Well, Judd, if you're listening, thanks for proving me wrong time and time again. So Judd does some jokes and he's funny talking about his daughter and who's an actress and she's making so much money she moved home and that was all funny. And he announces the first comedian of the night is Ian Edwards. And once I heard the voice, I knew who Ian Edwards was from Comedy Central. He was hilarious, as funny as a comedian as I've ever seen. I've seen Sebastian Maniscalco and Jay Moore and guys like that, and even saw Seinfeld. Ian Edwards, in my opinion, is right up there. Side-splitting. My stomach was hurting. I was laughing so hard. And he's done, and Judd comes out and says, okay, guys, ladies and gentlemen, Bo Burnham. And I didn't know who Bo Burnham was until he walked out on stage, and I went, oh, my gosh, it's that kid. And his parody songs and his comedy just kept laughing and laughing and laughing. And then after, 20, 25 minutes of him, Judd comes out and says, ladies and gentlemen, this is a legend, Eric Idle.
No shit.
No shit, Chet. No shit. Ladies and gentlemen, if you don't know who Eric Idle is, he's one of the founding members of Monty Python. He is the writer of Spamalot and all the little pithy little songs Monty Python sang, like famously Sit on My Face, were written and performed by Eric Idle. And he had another gentleman with him, and shout out to that guy. I can't remember his name, but he was hilarious and a great musician and funny. So I am just in awe of this lineup. And Judd Apatow comes out and he says, this is, as the host, I'm supposed to come out and calm you down after that. But I don't know if I can do it. Ladies and gentlemen, Conan O'Brien. And Conan came out and just essentially walked around the theater doing his show with people in the audience, talking to them, engaging them, being hilarious the whole time. He didn't have like a set but he was just being himself. It was like we were all the guests on the show, and he and Judd told funny stories, and he was out there for at least 20 minutes, and he went off, and Judd told some jokes, and everyone kind of calmed down, and he said, everybody, my best friend, Adam Sandler. And Adam Sandler came out with his guitar, and they sat there and they told stories for 20 minutes about how they came up together and some stand-up gigs they did together, and how Judd Apatow and Adam lost each other on some campus in Chicago area. This is before cell phones. I don't know how they found each other. And then Adam Sandler did a 40-minute set. Well, if I understand correctly, he's doing a big tour of stand-up, and he had pieces of paper. He was trying out jokes. He would crumple one and go, okay, that sucks. And that was funny to us. He had some half-formed songs that he was playing. You know, he's doing some new songs, and it was such a night. And if I didn't love Jennifer before she made that pull of those tickets, you know, I didn't think I could love her more, but like my love doubled when she came up that big, and that she powered through it. And of course we stayed and enjoyed, and had we missed it, we would have been brokenhearted. And I don't know why I'm surprised, because I'm so blessed to have these once in a lifetime moments, and to share it with her was so great. But I give all of the credit for that story and those experiences to Judd Apatow and Jennifer for just finding those tickets randomly and sticking it out to go and stay up that late. So that was our first night in Los Angeles, and it was a great night and a great time. Hopefully we'll be back. I'm sure we won't have one of those experiences again, but we'll be back to Los Angeles for sure.
Knowing what I know about you and your life story, I wouldn't count that out. You might have another experience just like that.
Hey, Streetwalkers, here's a word from our sponsors.
Hey, Streetwalkers. Well, you're not literally Streetwalkers, but now that I've got your attention, I am Stephen O'Reilly, and I have a podcast called the Bar Star Podcast. And since you're listening to the Fascination Street podcast, I think you should check out my show. It's just as interesting without all the famous people, because Steve has connections that I just do not have. But if you dig podcasts about music, working musicians, and other random shit that I decided to talk about, based around music, of course, because that's what I do. I'm a working musician for the past 30 years, then you need to check out the Bar Star Podcast. You can get it wherever you get your podcast, on any platform, and make sure you check out barstarpodcast.com. Now back to the one and only Steve Owens and whatever the hell he was talking about.
Let's get back into it.
Well, I'm proud to be an advisor to something called Donate Life Hollywood, which is based out of that organ procurement organization out there. It was founded by Tanaya Wallace, who was raised in what I call working class Hollywood. Her mother was a studio tutor with clients like Tommy from Alice and Joey Lawrence and a girl named Drew Barrymore. Tanaya used to do her homework with Drew on their dining room table. And her mother was a studio tutor, and her father was a professional stagehand, a union tradesman. And he's one of these guys, I think, that worked on so many movies. If he had an IMDb page, it would crash the internet. I think there's a whole score of people out there like Tanaya's dad that have that many credits under their belt. And they were out of the game before IMDb started. So what Tanaya does, and Tanaya, like I said, grew up in Hollywood. And the story I tell about her is she ran around with these 6 kids in high school, and one of them was an actor. This one young man was an actor as part of her kind of brat pack in high school. And after he had his first big role in a movie, they would get together at a Subway in Silver Lake across the street from the library. They would get together at that Subway and read his fan mail, and they'd all read it. And after that, Leonardo went on to Titanic success. So Tanaya uses her contacts to influence writers and directors and showrunners and actors to make sure they're telling the truth about organ donation and transplantation. Based on a 2008 study, we know that when TVs and movies get it wrong, it costs people registering to be organ donors, thus costing people their lives ultimately. So telling the right story and telling it the right way and not perpetuating any myths is a matter of life and death. And I'm happy to help her. And I'll brandishly say that we're doing all we can to influence Hollywood, not only to write stories, but to tell some truthful stories too, like Joey Gacy.
I want to talk about Hollywood saving lives just for a second. Back when I was in middle school, I was upstairs. I had taken a shower. I was getting ready for school. My mom was making me breakfast or whatever. My sister had already left for school. She was in high school. And I came downstairs and I saw my mom laying on her back, unconscious. She had a little trickle of blood coming out of her nose. She had wet herself laying there. And so I had known that when somebody dies, they lose control of their facilities. They lose control of their bladder. And so I thought for sure my mom was dead. And so I called 911. And the reason I'm telling this story is because I lived at that time in an apartment complex that had the same name as an apartment complex one street over. You know, one was called Broken Oak and one was called Broken Oak 2 or whatever. And when I called 911, after I told the lady everything she needed to know, I was about to hang up. And then I remembered that I had watched a G.I. Joe cartoon maybe a week before. And on those G.I. Joe cartoons, they would always have like a little PSA or a little, you ought to know kind of a thing at the end. And I remembered that it had said that if you ever need to call 911, let them hang up first, because that's how you'll know that they have all the information they need. And so as I was about to hang up, I remembered that, and then I waited. And then the operator was, talking to me and asking me some more questions or whatever. And then she said, the ambulance is telling me they're there. Do you see them? And I could hear that they were at the other apartment complex across the street or one street over. And I said, no, they're over on the other street. There's two of them with the same name. I'm over here at this other one. And, they came and saved my mom's life, basically. Well, not basically. They came and got my mom and saved her life. But it was because I had seen that cartoon that I stayed on the phone and directed them to the right apartment complex. And so when you say that Hollywood does have an effect and they can save lives, or inversely, they can cost them, I agree with you. And that is my real life example of how that could have turned out a lot differently. Had I hung up, they would have wandered around that other apartment complex looking for me. That could have cost, it would have been valuable time. It could have cost my mom her life. So good work with what you're doing with that organization. I think that is phenomenal, and I think it is needed. So keep doing that, man.
Well, like G.I. Joe told us back then, and I'll tell you now, knowing is half the battle.
Thank you. That's what that was, the segment. I was like, it was called The More You Know. No, not that.
So they would say, and knowing is half the battle. G.I. Joe. And then,
That's right.
That was a great cartoon, wasn't it?
It was a good cartoon, man. I loved it. Well, Joe, I know that we didn't get to a bunch of stuff. We didn't even talk about did you meet Jerry West?
Yeah. I told you I worked in Las Vegas, and my first night there was a game at the Thomas and Mack Center. And in two previous places where I worked, I had interacted with Dick Vitale. So this wasn't me seeing Dick Vitale in a situation and talk. When I say I talked to him, I was, in charge of the on-court entertainment, which is, anything but the game. We're throwing out T-shirts and cheerleaders coming out or the band playing. Like, I had all that in-game entertainment stuff. And Dick Vitale always wanted to be part of it and have fun, pregame. So I got to talk to him on two occasions. He didn't know me. I just knew I'd met him twice. And I'm waiting in the credential line. And on the other side of the table where they're handing out press credentials is Dick Vitale. So I'm not astounded at Dick Vitale there. It was ESPN Big Monday. Chris Farley used to do the commercial. We had a big basketball, ESPN Big Monday. And it was New Mexico versus UNLV. And Dick Vitale was talking, and he looks to his right and says, "Hey, what are you doing here?" And he kind of like pointed at me. Well, he's Italian like I am. We talk with our hands. And I'm going, oh, my gosh, does he recognize me? And, you can live a lifetime in a moment, because a moment later I heard this voice, "Excuse me, son." And I stepped to the side, and the logo walked by me, Jerry West. And he was the one Dick Vitale was, of course, talking to. And why he was waiting in line is beyond me. But he walked around the table and started chatting with Dick Vitale. And when I ran the tournament, I took all the high-level credentials, and I would have the guys radio me from the top of the runway when anyone came there, and they had a list. So it was like Jerry West and Paul Westfall and these people that would come in and they'd be like, Joe, there's a person, they'd give me the name. So I would meet them at the door and personally hand them their credentials. And I also held the credentials for all the cheerleading coaches as well. So when the cheerleading coaches showed up, I got to meet them too, back in my Philly days.
Ladies and gentlemen, when Joe said, when he called Jerry West the logo, for those of you who don't know, Jerry West is the silhouette for the NBA logo. That is currently. That might change, maybe. But for the last ever, Jerry West is that silhouette. That's him. That's crazy. That is nuts, man.
I've lived this life. I've lived it, and it's been a blessing to meet all those people, but to be able to overcome what I've overcome is the greater blessing.
Well, you're definitely a fighter, and I think, like you said, you get that from your parents. Yes, Italians are feisty fighters, but so are the Irish. So good on you. Joe Lafferty, from the book Just in Time, A Memoir of Faith and the Fight for Life. I want to thank you so much for taking your time and for finally making this happen. Like I said at the beginning of last week's episode, this was 9 months to a year in the works. So I'm glad it finally worked out. And again, thank you so much for this time. Before I let you go, Joe, can you tell everybody where they can find you on social media?
Absolutely. I am the Joe Lafferty on Twitter and Instagram, and thejoelafferty.com on the World Wide Web. You can go there and link my book, click the link, and you take you to Amazon to find my book. Please think about being an organ donor. You can go to OrganDonor.gov and register to be in the National Registry. And make sure your family knows what you do. Make sure they know your intentions, that you want to be an organ donor. Because sometimes it's difficult because people are an organ donor and their family didn't know that that was their intention. There can be some tension and some miscommunication in the hospital. If that falls to you, you want to take that burden off of your loved ones so they know that you wanted to help people. It's an easy conversation to have at that time rather than put that on them at a later date. So OrganDonor.gov and sign up to be an organ donor. And please, please be kind to each other. Stay safe. And I think as a nation, we can get through anything.
You know what, Joe? I want to do something. And if you're okay with it, this is what I want to do. I want all my listeners out there to do this. I want you to tweet. I want you to tag me. And I want you to tag Joe Lafferty at the Joe Lafferty and at Fascination Street Pod. But I want you to also tag 5 of your friends. And I want you to tell them in the tweet, Organ Donors Save Lives. That's what I want you to do. I want you to hashtag Organ Donors Save Lives. I want you to tag 5 of your friends and also me and Joe. And I'm going to pick one of those people that does that. I'm going to go through all of them. I'm going to pick one. We're going to send you this book, Just in Time, of A Memoir of Faith and the Fight for Life. And this one is going to be autographed by Joe. Not me, but by Joe. And I'm going to mail it to you. How's that sound? Is that cool, Joe?
That sounds awesome with just one edit because I'm inspired by what you said. And I want this to be unique to the streetwalkers, which I'm always amazed when podcasts identify their listeners by something. And some of them are cheesy, like they really make up a word. But Fascination Street and Streetwalkers, it's awesome because we're all on this street together and we're looking for good stories. So you said something, Steve, and Hollywood saves lives. I want the hashtag. Organ donation is important, but you told such a compelling story about your mother. And it doesn't matter that it was G.I. Joe and it was a cartoon. They taught you something at a young age, and it stuck. And that was important. And I think there are situations like that. And I'm sure your listeners are going to think of something in their own life when they learned something on TV that helped them at some point. Might not have saved a life, but it helped them get through a situation. Because entertainment is that powerful. I think the hashtag for the contest should be Hollywood Saves Lives. And if you would make that edit for me, I'd be honored.
Well, let's do it that way. That sounds great. Y'all heard it, streetwalkers. That hashtag is Hollywood Saves Lives. Tag me and Joe and 5 of your friends, and I'll pick one of those winners, and we'll send you an autographed copy of the book.
Steve, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your audience, and take care and be safe.
thank you for your time. It was 100% my pleasure. When we first started talking, I wanted to interview you before I read the book, and you did not want that to happen. You wanted me to read the book first, and I'm so glad that you wanted me to do it that way, because it was much more compelling to speak with you after knowing everything I knew that was in the book. And also, it really amped up my anticipation of trying to get this scheduled and get this done. So thank you again for that. As far as why I call my listeners streetwalkers, I would love to take credit for that. But no, that was a listener and former guest, Stephen O'Reilly of the Bar Star podcast. He came up with that, and he is the one who decided that that's what my listeners were called. And the response has been overwhelming. So I haven't heard a single listener tell me they don't like that. They all love it. Like hashtag streetwalkers is a thing. So, so thanks, Stephen O'Reilly.
When I was in your store, I wanted a T-shirt that said, I'm a hashtag streetwalker.
Maybe I'll have to put that up there.
I'd be proud to wear that.
Nice. Well, Joe, again, thank you so much, man. Thank you for your time. Thank you for these wonderfully fascinating stories. And thank you for doing all the good that you do and for being the good person that you are. I think it's really important that you reciprocate all the kindness that comes into your life. And I don't mean you as in you, Joe. I mean you as in
the collective.
Yes, the collective. All of the peoples. So thank you for doing that. And like I said, you're doing great work. I want you to have a great rest of your week, sir.
Thank you, Steve, and Godspeed.
Yes, sir. I will talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye. As always, thanks for listening, Streetwalkers. And don't forget, follow the show on Twitter at FascinationSTPD, on Instagram at Fascination Street Pod. Follow the podcast page on Facebook at Fascination Street Podcast. And of course, you can always email me at fascinationstreetpod@gmail.com. And if you haven't already, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button and rate us on iTunes. Opening music is the song Magnolia from the 2014 album Intransigence, used with permission from Douglas Miles Clark. Closing music is Apollo from the 2001 album Into the Known by the band Sapphire. Thanks for hanging out with us and getting to know a little bit about our guest. We'll see you next time on Fascination Street.